Communion is always a special time. I'm going to be reading today from Matthew chapter 14, if you'd like to turn in your Bibles. We're in the middle of what we call Crisis 101 on Sunday evenings. We're studying what we call the 10 Red Sea Rules. It's based on Exodus chapter 14 and the predicament that the Israelites found themselves in when they had the sea in front of them and the Egyptian army behind them. This was the original rock and a hard place. You could say that they were between it, a rock and a hard place. And so we're looking at those rules, those principles that are taught there in the book of Exodus. And today we have a message entitled Hope in a State of Helplessness. Hope in a state of helplessness. Has anyone ever been in a difficult situation? Have you ever been in a situation where you felt helpless? You looked around and you didn't see any possible way? I think most of us have. It could be physical issues, could be the death of a family member or a close friend, a divorce, the loss of a job, a host of circumstances in life that we wish were different than what they are. Sometimes they're because of poor choices by ourselves or others. Sometimes they're because we're doing the right thing. Sometimes they're because we're doing the wrong thing. Sometimes it's just because we live in a fallen world. We live in a world that has been infected by sin. Bad things happen to good people. It's part of the human condition. Good things happen to bad people. It's a part of life. We're going to be looking at a situation today in the lives of the disciples in which bad things happened to good people. Jesus had just fed 5,000 men plus women and children. We don't know how many total that would be, possibly 10 to 15,000 people. The event took place near Bethsaida on the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. After the crowd was fed and the disciples gathered up 12 baskets of leftovers, we come to our text, Matthew 14, verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. Now, the word there means that he ordered them. It indicates that there was some resistance, but Jesus insisted that they get in the boat. The disciples got into the boat and went ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. Now, John recorded, it doesn't have it here in Matthew, but John recorded why Jesus was in such a hurry to shoo the disciples away and dismiss the crowd. In John 6:14, we see that the crowd wanted to make Jesus king by force. They had seen the great miracles that he was doing and the tremendous following that he had. He had at least 5,000, probably 10 or 15,000. And they were under the oppression of the Romans. They didn't like the rulers that had authority over them at this time. So by force, I don't know how you make a king by force, but that's what the Bible says. They were somehow going to force Jesus to become their earthly king. Well, of course, this didn't go along with God's plan at all. And so he got the disciples out of there as quickly as possible because maybe you've been in a mob mentality. We see it on TV all the time. Something happens to ordinarily level-minded, sensible people when they get in a mob and everybody's doing it, crazy things happen. And these disciples at this point in time didn't fully understand Jesus' plan. They were still thinking earthly kingdom. So they could have very easily gotten sucked into this whole hysteria. So he said, go on across the lake. He made them get in the boat. And then he dismissed the crowd. So that's the setting there. After he dismissed them, verse 23, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land. One of the Gospels says 3 to 3.5 miles from land. This is it's sometimes called the Sea of Galilee, sometimes called the Lake of Gennesaret. It's a very, very large body of water. I've been on it. And I've stood in these places that they have talked about here in this passage. It's a large body of water. The boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now we're told that it's not uncommon for cool breezes to come head eastward from the Mediterranean, and as they come over the mountains, they come together with the warm air that's over the Sea of Galilee, and it often causes a very sudden and very violent and very unexpected storm. And that evidently is what happened in this situation. Verse 25 says, during the fourth watch of the night, that's between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost or an apparition, that they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. Now, just a word of advice here. Before you step out of a boat onto the water, make sure you hear the word come from Jesus himself. Don't put the Lord to a foolish test. Don't be presumptuous. Be sure you hear the word come before you do that. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, came toward Jesus, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid. He began to sink. He cried out, Lord, save me. When he saw the wind, immediately Jesus reached out his hand, caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? When they climbed in the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, there was a situation earlier when they said, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the waves obey him? They had by this time come to the correct conclusion, truly, you are the Son of God. That is a confession of faith. That is a confession of Jesus' deity. I'd like, first of all, look at the fear of helplessness. The fear of helplessness. Verse 24 says the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves. The disciples were helpless. Have you ever felt helpless? Does anybody like feeling helpless? I hate feeling helpless. That's one of the things I don't like about flying. We flew recently, and once you fly, they take your luggage from you. They determine when you leave. They determine the course you take. They determine when you arrive. They determine when and if you get your luggage back. I don't like that feeling. What if I want to lollygag up here in the clouds for a while? Nope. They're in charge. Your life is in their hands. You've entrusted yourself to a pilot. I don't like that feeling. I remember how I felt when I landed on terra firma and got back in my own car with my own key and my own steering wheel. I relished that moment because all of a sudden, now I'm in control. If I want to go, I go. If I want to stay, I stay. If I want to go here, I go there. If I want to go there, I go there. I'm in charge. I like that feeling. I don't like the feeling of helplessness. These disciples were helpless. They had no control over the weather. They were in the middle of a storm, being tossed, buffeted. One manuscript reads, plunged under the waves. There's an image here that the waves were breaking over the vessel. This was a tremendous storm. They were doing the best they could, but they were no match for the storm. You might say they were in over their head, literally and figuratively. They were in a situation beyond their control, and they were afraid. Have you ever been there? Yet they were in the center of God's will. That was the irony of it all. They had not been disobedient. Jesus didn't say, stay on the shore, there's going to be a storm out there. He said, get in the boat and go to the other side, and they obeyed. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, and the storm still came. Jesus never promised smooth sailing. He never promised that you wouldn't have trials and tribulations and difficulties in this life. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, and they were still in a storm. The fear of helplessness. Now, there's a truth here that we need to remember. Obeying God does not necessarily guarantee smooth sailing. In fact, obeying God could possibly lead you right into the middle of a storm. But then let's contrast that with the cheer of hope. Jesus has a way of changing the mood when he shows up. In verse 25, it says, during the fourth watch, he went out to them. Remember, that was between 3 and 6 a.m. And he said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And that's where Peter said, bid me come on the water. Got out of the boat, walked on the water, came toward Jesus. He began to sink. Jesus rescued him. He got in the boat, the wind died down, and they worshiped him, saying, you're the Son of God. Jesus showed up. Even though he had been on the mountain praying, he saw the storm, he moved into action, he went to them walking on the sea. When he arrived, he said, take courage, it is I. Now, there's an interesting thing about that term, it is I. In the Greek, it's only 2 words. Simply, I am. Does that phrase ring a bell at all? I am. There are 7 I am statements of Jesus in the Gospels. I am the bread of life, and so on and so forth. God said, I am. Who shall I say sent me? Moses asked. Tell him, I am sent you. I am that I am. Jesus, the great I am, had arrived. Well, that has a tendency to change things considerably. Now the disciples had hope, so much hope that Peter got out of the boat and walked on top of the water that he was so afraid of. The very circumstances that he was so afraid of were now under his feet when Jesus said, come. Well, of course, we know the rest of the story. He took his eyes off Jesus. He focused on the wind and the waves, the circumstances around him. He started looking around and he thought, people don't walk on water. This is impossible. I can't be doing this. Those waves, that wind, down he goes. He took his eyes off of Jesus and he began to focus elsewhere. And isn't that what we do in life? We look at circumstances. We look at the report. We look at the checkbook. We look at our own resources and we feel inadequate. We feel helpless and we see no way out. And then Jesus shows up. He reached out his hand and saved him. They got in the boat. The storm stopped. Peter's faith wavered when he saw his circumstances, but you got to give him credit. He didn't say, disciples, save me. Throw me a life preserver. Throw me a rope. Disciples, please save me. He didn't say, I'll save myself. I'll try to see if I can swim back to the boat. No, he knew where to turn. He said, Lord, save me. There's a lesson in there for us. Jesus should be our first resort, not our last. If we focus on the circumstances around us, instead of looking to Jesus, we too may sink. When we focus on our weaknesses, we need to be focusing on his strength. As Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he was walking on top of the water. When he took his eyes off, he began to sink. So we as Christians don't have to be under the circumstances. We can be on top of the circumstances. So there are 5 quick takeaways I'd like to get from this account this morning. A, God allowed me to be here. Whether he caused it, whether he allowed it, for whatever reason, I'm here. He's sovereign. It happened on His watch, so evidently He must have permitted it. It must be within His permissive will, if not His perfect will. So here I am. The disciples were in the will of God, unlike Jonah, who was out of the will of God. In the Bible, we see two kinds of storms: storms of correction, when God disciplines us, and storms of perfection, when God grows us. Jonah was in a storm because he disobeyed. He needed to be corrected. The disciples were in a storm because they obeyed and they were being perfected. Whether it's a storm of correction or a storm of perfection, God works it all together for good to them that love Him and are called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. B, He's interceding for me. How does that make you feel? Can you picture Jesus seated at the right hand of the Father interceding for you personally? Write your name in the blank. Father, so-and-so is having a hard time. I ask that you give them strength. I ask that you guide them. I ask that you equip them. He's interceding for us according to Romans 8:34. He's at the right hand of the Father. Jesus was praying. While His disciples were in the storm, Jesus was praying. Mark 6:48 said He saw them. He knew what was going on, just as He sees us. Hebrews 4:15 says we don't have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weakness. We have one who's been tempted in every way, just like we are. He knows how it feels. He's been there. He feels our infirmities, our burdens, our needs, our fears, and He intercedes. C, He will come to me. Mark 6:48, about the fourth watch of the night, He came. I don't know why He took so long. That's His wisdom. He does things in His time and His way. But He came. Even though He was up on the mountain praying, He saw the disciples in their storm, and at just the right moment, He came, stilled the storm, and took them to safety. John 6:20 says, He said to them, It is I, don't be afraid. Then they were willing to take Him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. He came to them. We often feel like Jesus has departed, but He hasn't. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 1 said we were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He has delivered us, He will deliver us, and He will continue to deliver us, according to the Apostle Paul. He knew what he was talking about. He had been in situations that we'll never face. Beaten, shipwrecked, left for dead. He knew what he was talking about. He had experienced it. By walking on the water, not swimming, walking on the water, Jesus showed His disciples the thing they feared the most was under His feet. D, He will help me grow. Jesus would soon return to heaven, and the disciples would have many more storms to deal with. They had to learn to trust Him even when He was not physically present. He asked Peter, Why did you doubt? That doubt literally means standing uncertainly between two ways. Peter was at a crossroads here. He could keep his faith and trust in Jesus and remain on top of the water. Or he could look around and see his circumstances, his human reasoning, his human powers, and his capabilities, and sink. He had two choices. At that point in time, he chose to believe his senses instead of his faith. We have that same choice today. What are we going to believe? Are we going to believe our senses? I saw the David Copperfield show a while back. And I don't know if you're familiar with David Copperfield, but he's a world-renowned illusionist. I discovered that my senses can be fooled. Have you all discovered that yet? Your senses can be fooled. If you rely on your senses, if you walk by sight, you can end up in some pretty bad situations. As Billy reminded us this week from the book of Habakkuk, the righteous live by faith. We live by faith in the revealed Word of God. We must give Peter credit for knowing where to turn when he began to sink. Maybe he recalled this incident in 1 Peter when he wrote, "The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer." I think this is probably the most sincere prayer in the whole Bible. Lord, save me. I mean, you can just feel the urgency in that prayer. If you were texting it, you'd put a whole bunch of exclamation points after it. Maybe a few emojis too. Is that what you call them? Yeah, is that what you call them? That is a sincere prayer. And when we come to the end of our rope, we don't have time for formalities. We don't have time to say, "Our most gracious Heavenly Father, would you..." We don't have time for that stuff. We cry out in desperation, "Lord, save me." And that's where Peter was at that point in time. And God, as He always does, came through in that darkest hour. This, I'm sure, helped Peter grow in his faith and prepared him for trials in the future. And the last takeaway today, He will see me through. He will see me through. Emphasis on the will. You can depend on it. Whether He says, "Go to the other side of the lake," or "Come to me on the water," our job is to trust and obey. He will not let you down. When they took him into the boat, they immediately reached the shore where they were headed. It was only when Jesus was in the boat that they reached their destination. In the book of Acts, the disciples found themselves in many other kinds of storms. You might call them the storms of persecution. No doubt they took courage when they recalled this experience. And we can too. God has delivered us through many storms in our lives. And the Bible says that when we receive strength and comfort in those times, then we can share it with others. We can share that same comfort that we receive with those who are going through similar circumstances in their lives. These difficult times that we go through help us to grow. They help us to help others. Peter walked on the water because he had faith in Jesus' word, "Come." The secret to overcoming the storms of life is to keep looking to Him and believing His word. That's what Billy defined true faith as this week, and I really loved his message on the book of Habakkuk. True faith is just simply believing what God has said until you see it come to pass. That's what faith is. The righteous will live by faith. The righteous take God at His word. They claim it. They stand on it. As Peter experienced victory by keeping his eyes on Jesus, we too can experience victory over our storms. I would rather be in a storm with Jesus than in the sunshine without Him. You're much safer in a storm with Jesus in the boat than smooth sailing when it's not. So keep your faith, your trust, your eyes on Him. He'll see you through. Shall we stand? Father, we thank You so much that this account has been preserved for our reading today. And there was no accident. Everything in the Bible is there for a reason. And we just pray, Lord, that You would apply this situation to whatever it is that we're going through today. Help us to realize that you can be depended upon regardless of the circumstances around us, regardless of what our senses are telling us. Help us, Lord, to keep our faith and trust in You. We pray for those, Lord, who might be in the midst of the storm this morning. We pray that they would be encouraged by this story from the Sea of Galilee. We'll give You the praise for it. In Jesus' name, amen. You are dismissed.